Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Andrew Erickson and by our guest, Jacob Gibbs of CBS Sports. Jacob, we were just talking before we started recording about how, for you, the busy season has kind of started already. You're already kind of in the writing day-to-day grind. Can you tell everybody what you're doing over with FFT this year?
Yeah, so for Fantasy Football Today, I'm writing their newsletter. And so what that entails right now is every weekday I'm putting out a different team preview, doing all 32 teams, talking about basically every fantasy relevant player or anyone who has a chance of being fantasy relevant, and then giving like my process behind my projections and how I get all of these different players to different projections, what range of outcomes they might have. It's been a lot of work, but I do like feel more ready than ever for the season, because it's already like, sometimes you deal with the burnout and like not being quite ready to like write every single day. And those first few weeks just feel so hectic, and it's like, I'm kind of already in it. So yeah, super excited to talk about some guys today.
Jacob, definitely one of the smartest analysts out there, so everybody make sure you're checking out that newsletter. We're talking today about some wide receivers with massive upside, and we're going to talk about some of the more proven guys that we think could maybe take another leap. We're going to talk about some young potential breakout wide receivers, and also some deeper sleepers that we think could, just add value. Maybe they're not going to be wide receiver ones, but they are going to be values based on where they're going. So we're going to dive right in with those. Erickson, are you also in the in kind of the same boat as Jacob with the, feeling like you're ramping up, already kind of in it, almost close to in-season writing routine yet, or still kind of in that preseason, just about to get into draft season here as we are on the cusp of August?
Well, something that I have spent doing some time with is mock drafts on some of these more like CBS, like a Yahoo and ESPN. So getting away from the best ball streets, because you have to reset your brain a little bit, because drafting in best ball and drafting in your home league are very two different things. And I think last year I didn't do enough. I didn't take that into consideration enough. So I was drafting with more of a best ball mindset, and that really shouldn't be the case. Like, you need to change your approach depending on what format your league is in. It's super important. And I was looking at ADPs of these websites, and they're so different than on best ball. So I need to reset and make sure that when I'm speaking to the audience, what I'm talking about in terms of why I think this player is overvalued at this price. And I think ultimately prices are going to change in every single draft you're in. ADP is never going to be exactly what it is. It's going to change all over the place, but your player takes, for the most part, if you're right about a player being really good, then it probably doesn't matter as much where you actually drafted them, as long as I hit, right? And kind of the same thing with a player hurting you, right? Yeah, Najee Harris being a bust hurts way less if you draft him in round 9 than round 5. But if he loses the job to Jaylen Warren, regardless, well, he was a bad pick regardless. So that's kind of something that I'm kind of trying to contextualize a little bit more with my mindset as I'm heading into this season. And I can at least speak from doing previews before of teams. You feel so great when you look at each team individually going out of that. I think Gibbs is spot on with that. You feel so great about it. You feel super knowledgeable heading into the year.
I think I'm pretty sure I've said this on this show before, but it's one of my favorite notes from Scott Pianowski at Yahoo is any strategy works if you draft the right players. Like, you can have whatever strategy you want as long as you pick the right players. It's probably going to work out pretty well. So just get good players on your team. That's my advice to everybody. Just a quick reminder for everyone: all of our 2024 consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Also, a quick note: the winner of Trophy Smack's I Suck at Fantasy Football flag is Safety Net 11. Please get in touch with our customer support agents at mailbag@fantasypros.com with your mailing address and proof of your subscription to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel, and we will get that flag shipped out to you. Again, the winner is Safety Net 11. Congratulations. We've also teamed up with Trophy Smack to bring you another amazing giveaway: the 2024 NFL Superstar Fantasy Football Draft Board Kit. It's perfect for 12, 10, or even 18 leagues. This draft board kit features vibrant player labels, Smack Talk stickers, and everything else you need to make your draft day unforgettable. To be eligible, all you need to do is subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel, your ultimate source for fantasy football analysis and updates. Leave a comment on any of our videos, and that's it. We'll be announcing the lucky winner right here on the channel, so don't forget to turn on those notifications to know when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. Subscribe, comment, and get ready to draft like a pro with the 2024 NFL Superstar Fantasy Football Draft Board Kit from Trophy Smack. All right, enough preamble, guys. Let's dive right in. We'll start with the kind of proven wide receivers with upside. You each have a couple of names here, and Jacob, we'll start with the first guy you want to talk about.
It's Nico Collins. So his expert consensus ranking on Fantasy Pros is wide receiver 17. I have him wide receiver 9, and I think he legitimately does have the ability to push into that like top 3 type of wide receiver spot for fantasy. He's really kind of a cheat code for fantasy purposes. I think he really is a special player. People realize that now at this point. He had almost 1,300 yards last year. But I want to dive into just like the recipe behind the stats that we get for Nico Collins, because it's really unique. So he runs really, really deep routes. And then obviously we know he has the quarterback and the play caller who are willing to attack aggressively on those deep routes against any kind of defense. And then he also has the yardage after the catch ability. So like it's pretty unusual for a player to be running so deep down the field, also getting targets at a high rate, and then also creating on their own after that. So his average route depth last year was 10.4 yards. And if you're not familiar with average route depth, that is the distance on average from the line of scrimmage that the initial cut in the route comes. So on average, Collins was over 10 yards downfield before his initial cut. And he was still able to draw targets at a really high rate, which I said is unique. So for reference, over the past 10 years, there have been 90 instances of a wide receiver running 300 or more routes and recording a double-digit average route depth. On average, that group drew a target on 17.7% of their routes. Generally speaking, receivers who are running really deep routes don't draw targets at a high rate. Nico Collins does, like truly in a unique way. 26% up from the average of 18. That was 4th highest among the 90 qualifiers. So if you look at the guys up in that range, it was Chris Olave, who we're very excited to get to. That's one of Erickson's guys. The only other person to do is Justin Jefferson has done it twice. Collins was 4th. So that is, really the kind of the recipe we're looking at is like Justin Jefferson type of volume in terms of like where the targets are coming down the field and the type of actual target volume that he's drawing. Jefferson's target per route run rates have been 26.7, 27.1% over the past 2 seasons. Collins is 26. So they're nearly identical.
What's so exciting to me about a guy like Collins is, and you already mentioned, we know he has the quarterback, and specifically a quarterback who, as a rookie, was so willing to throw deep while also protecting the ball. Like he was going down the field and not committing turnovers. It was really remarkable from Stroud. I mean, the only real question mark with Collins, at least in my opinion, is the fact that they added Diggs, the fact that Tank Dell coming back healthy. There's just 3 quality wide receivers in this offense. I think he would be higher than his ECR of wide receiver 17 if that Diggs trade hadn't been made. By ranking him in the top 10, though, you're kind of planting your flag that you're not really that concerned about that trade, right, Jacob?
I'm not. I actually have a really interesting note. So I want to, you probably, if you guys are, listening to this podcast, you're pretty plugged in. You probably know about yard per route run data and the fact that Nico Collins last year turned in one of the most insane yard per route run rates we've ever seen. Him and Brandon Ayuk and Tyreek Hill joined a group of only 6 or 7 players who have averaged over 3 yards per route run since the time we have that data, which is like the past 10 or 15 years. So pretty elite company. The note, and the reason I bring this up is because you bring up Diggs and Tank Dell. Specifically, when there have been 3 or more wide receivers on the field, typically we see yard per route run rates decline, which makes sense intuitively. You're competing for targets with multiple receivers compared to just one receiver if there's 2 receivers on the field. You get what I'm saying? And so when you look at Brandon Ayuk's splits, his massive yard per route run rate actually shrinks quite a bit. When he had 3 or more receivers on the field, it was just 2 yards per route run, which is still good, but not like up in that really, really elite range. Nico Collins didn't see his rate drop at all. His rate with 3 or more receivers on the field was 2.9, which for reference, over the past 5 years, the only players that have been ahead of that is Tyreek Hill's done it twice. Cooper Kupp did it in his 2021 season. Devontae Adams did it in his 2020 season. So like that is, it's really like there's an offense that is helping here. Obviously the offensive infrastructure is good, but like just from a pure like ability to go out and win, regardless of what's happening on the field, Nico is proven to be elite. And I think Diggs is going to play an important role, but I think they're actually going to use him more in the slot. And if anything, that just creates even more answers than they had last year and more problems for opposing defenses to deal with. So I do think the target rate will drop for Nico this year, almost assuredly, with Tank Dell healthy and Stephon Diggs in the picture. But I think we have a lot of things that could help offset that. One of them is the fact that the Texans really were more of a run-first leaning team last year, especially early in the season. First downs, they were running at a higher than average rate. In the red zone, they were running at a higher than average rate. In neutral situations, when the games were close, 6 or points, leading or trailing, like in all things equal, this team was kind of leaning on the run game. And it makes sense that a rookie quarterback. But now they go out and get Diggs. they're in the second year with CJ Stroud. If they end up passing a lot more, that creates a lot more routes. And so like we talk about this per route data and how amazing Collins was with it. He actually was only, I want to say like 50th in total routes run last year. And so like what happens if that increases in a dramatic way? You know, if they really do pass a lot, look at MVP odds. CJ Stroud is the third most likely to win MVP. That's not coming on the ground. That production is all coming through the air. And so if we think that there's a real chance that that kind of season happens from Stroud, we're talking about probably like 5,000 plus yards passing. And I think so much of that is going to go to Nico Collins. And I think that's where you get that wide receiver one upside. And then what if something happens to Diggs or Tank Dell? If either one of those guys miss time, then we see Nico playing the role we saw last year with the elite target rates in an offense that's producing way more than it did last year. Things could really, really get out of control. When you get into the projections and the mathematical side of this, it's like, this could get nuts just because of how efficient he is because of the role that he plays.
Erickson, what do you see as kind of, not necessarily the hierarchy here, but let me rephrase. Do you think Nico Collins is the right wide receiver to pick out of this, receiver core for this topic of kind of that massive upside?
I think so. I mean, we saw it last year. He's the one that's played with CJ Stroud and showed that massive ceiling. So there's no argument for me about Nico Collins' upside. But the question marks are, okay, well, now you're adding a new piece to the offense. How does that affect Nico Collins? Stephon Diggs, is he washed? What if he's not? What if he's productive? I mean, again, we're going to get into this, but there's a reason why I also have a Texans receiver because, like Gibbs said, this Texans offense has upside, this passing game. One of these three Texans receivers, if not all of them, are all going to be hits. And if CJ Stroud is as good as he is and wins MVP, well, they all might have massive upside. So that's why you're pushing your chips in on the system. And Nico Collins, I think, is rightfully so at the top of it.
Erickson, let's move to your first wide receiver here. And Jacob already mentioned him. It's Chris Olave.
Yeah, Chris Olave. Wasn't the highest on Chris Olave because I did not fall in love with the Derek Carr to Chris Olave hype. And I think I was more or less proven right last year. He was lackluster. He did not live up to the massive breakout that we all thought he was going to get because Derek Carr had come in as a quarterback upgrade. But I have to give Olave some of his flowers where at least last year, week 9 onward, averaged 13.3 points per game. That was wide receiver 12 in 2023. So as he started to gel a little bit more with Derek Carr, you started to see him produce a little bit more. So that's encouraging. And when we're looking at players, so this particular category is proven wide receivers with upside. Look, Olave has been really good 2 years in the league. It's really been the lack of touchdowns that's really had him struggle. So look, wide receiver 25 as a rookie, wide receiver 19 in year 2. So we're starting to see players are allowed to get better, right? Nico Collins got better in his third year. Like players can continue to improve. And this is something that I never really, I missed on CeeDee Lamb a little bit last year because I wasn't considering that enough, where this guy's been really, really good, but he hadn't been great yet. Well, why can't Olave be great this year? Okay, he has another year with Derek Carr as his quarterback. Derek Carr is not the greatest quarterback in the world, but who tied CJ Stroud with the most 300-yard passing games last season? Derek Carr. I think that's one of the most crazy stats looking back at last year because you would never think that just based on the rhetoric around a Derek Carr. But as just an average passer, he can do that at the NFL level. And that's what you need for Chris Olave to, I think, hit this next level. And I think the other thing, too, that I like about Olave that kind of could capture some upside with him is the new offense that's coming in. Clint Kubiak's coming in from the Kyle Shanahan coaching scheme. So we're going to get the fun stuff. We're going to get play action. We're going to get motion. Last year, this is per Graham Barfield fantasy points. Olave ranked third in yards per route run while in motion. They basically didn't do it a lot last year. So we're looking at a player that 2 years in the NFL has been highly efficient on a yards per route run basis. He has another year with his quarterback, who I don't think is horrible. And if he benefits from a little bit more touchdown luck, I think you can see Olave break inside the top 10 receivers. And that to me is, he's taking another step forward. Last 2 seasons, it's just him and Terry McLaurin are receivers with at least 2,000 receiving yards that have scored fewer than 10 total touchdowns. He's 15th in receiving yards per game, 70 over the last 2 seasons. The number one predictor of fantasy points year over year. It's not targets rate prop run. It's receiving yards. Go figure, right? And Olave has shown that he can get receiving yards. So for me, I think he's going to continue to steadily increase his production. I think in year 3, I think that's why Olave to me has some upside.
Jacob, what do you think about Olave specifically in this Clint Kubiak offense and the opportunity, hopefully, for more touchdowns?
Yeah, I'm glad that Erickson hit on Kubiak because I'm really excited for that change. The Saints were last in both pre-snap motion and play action rates last year. And both of those things are just kind of pass game efficiency boosters. I think that's going to improve a lot under Kubiak. Another interesting note on Kubiak that I wanted to bring up is that last year Rashid Shaheed led the NFL in go route rate. Almost 1/3 of his routes were go routes. Olave wasn't far behind him. He was 12th in go route rate. Go routes just don't lead to very many targets. I'm excited about Kubiak because if you look at Brandon Ayuk, his go route rate has been very low. Instead of just having him run a ton of straight goes, he's doing more posts and corners. They're layering things in down the field in a way similar to what we saw in Houston with Bobby Slowick last year. And to me, that's exciting because New Orleans, it's not been very creative. It's just been like, go run deep. And still he's winning and drawing targets at a really high rate, which is really impressive. And so like, what does it look like if there's a little bit more nuance added to his route tree this year? I'm really excited.
Let's stick with you, Jacob, as we go to your next proven wide receiver with upside.
So to Jaylen Waddle, I was absolutely shocked when I saw Jaylen Waddle where he came out in my projections. The only wide receivers who have a higher median 2024 PPR output than Waddle in my projections are CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, and Garrett Wilson. Wide receiver 10 is where he's at. So that's ahead of some really good receivers who are going ahead of him. But the more I've dug into Miami's 2023 season, as I'm like building out the 2024 projections, it does feel clear to me they're probably going to see a lot more passing from this offense. It was a very, very weird year in Miami last year. So the Dolphins ranked 17th in pass rate on the year, but the rate when leading or trailing by 6 or fewer points, so when games were close, when Mike McDaniel was able to attack how he would like to, was the 3rd highest in the NFL. They were actually passing the ball at one of the highest rates. But they were playing with leads all the time. They were playing with a lead on 50% of their offensive drives. Only the 49ers, Ravens, and Lions had a higher rate. And they also were playing with a bunch of really big leads, like double-digit leads. And so if you look at Vegas look-ahead lines for this year, the Dolphins have the 4th highest implied point total. So they're expected to be a very good offense once again. But they're 10th in implied wins, which to me suggests that this team might not be leading quite as often as we saw last year. And I think that makes sense if you look at what happened to the defense this year. Miami's defense lost nearly 4,000 defensive snaps from 2023 to 2024. They had to let a lot of people walk because they're giving out all this money to their players. They have to sign they have to sign their receivers. And so if we see a diminished version of this defense and Miami is involved in more, just more neutral games, gets this projection to where it's at, where he's wide receiver 10, what if they get into shootouts more often and then we actually see like high route totals for this offense? Because Tyreek Hill last year was 44th in total routes run. Like Jaxon Smith-Njigba had more routes than Tyreek Hill did as a rookie who was only on the field for 3 receiver sets. Jaylen Waddle was 66th in routes run. On a per route basis, Waddle was as good as ever. It was his best season on a per route basis. And so like if this all shifts and it's not this weird situation where Miami is playing with huge leads all the time, just look at the stats for Waddle in first and second halves. Last year, he had 708 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns in the first halves of games compared to 300 yards and 1 touchdown in the second half of games. Raheem Mostert scored 11 of his 18 touchdowns in the second half of games. So like if things are just more neutral, then I think we're going to see a big season just because there's going to be more volume overall. And we've talked about contingency upside, like in Houston. What if Stephon Diggs or Tank Dell gets hurt? What if Tyreek Hill gets hurt? If Tyreek Hill were to miss time, then Waddle could easily be the wide receiver 1. I filtered out plays with Hill on the field to look at only his splits on routes run without Hill. And it's like his data increases to the level that Hill is producing out. And he's obviously a wide receiver 1 candidate. So like that's the kind of upside that we're looking at with Waddle. And I think that's important to bring up because like his situation is different in this regard than someone like Garrett Wilson. Like Garrett Wilson's projection is built with the assumption that he's going to have a target share that could reach like 30% or something. He doesn't have any star teammate wide receiver that might go down. This contingent upside is real. Obviously, we don't want to bet on players getting hurt or anything, but it's a real possibility, and it would open things up for Waddle in a massive way.
Erickson, would you have picked Waddle if Jacob didn't beat you to the punch? Because I know you have been all over him this draft season.
Yeah, that was one of the players that Jacob took from me by beating me to the show sheet. So yeah, I mean, you don't need. I mean, I'm convinced when you had Jaylen Waddle on the sheet, I was just ready to sit back my popcorn and let's lay it on. Like let's see this. And I think too, the Dolphins defense. Shaq Barrett just retired. That was who they brought in because they needed help on defense. They have nobody left on that defensive line. Miami is going to play in shootout after shootout, especially early on when you know this offense is going to be cooking. Look at their early season schedule. They're playing the Jaguars. They're playing the Titans early on. They're playing, I don't remember the rest of the teams, but it's very good. It's very favorable. It's like Tua, even though he's not a mobile quarterback, I know we're not talking about quarterbacks here, but Tua is going to throw for a ton of yards to open the season. I think that this Dolphins offense is going to be super productive, shootouts galore, and I love Jaylen Waddle, so I love the call.
Erickson, who's your last proven wide receiver here that we're going to talk about?
I'm going to Michael Pittman Jr. because I don't think you can be more proven than him over the last 3 seasons. Pittman is 18th in receiving yards, 7th in catches, and 7th in targets overall over the last 3 seasons. So he's been the model of consistency from a receiver standpoint. It's just the lack of touchdowns that are just killing him. He has 14 touchdowns, ranks 24th over that time span, except the fact that he's averaged 104 catches per year over the last 2 seasons, which ranks 5th. So this is a bet on not only Shane Steichen and this offense that we saw perform well above expectation last year with Gardner Minshew, who was not great as a quarterback. Even though Pittman somehow avoided the bust tag altogether despite losing his starting quarterback and Anthony Richardson last year, Michael Pittman still continued to ball out. He was top 10 overall in red zone targets, so I don't think that's going to change, even with Richardson under center. So he's going to get the red zone opportunities. He is the alpha in this offense. He had nearly 30% target share last year, which is 4th highest among all wide receivers. I'm not worried about Adonai Mitchell. I think Josh Downs is a nice player as well, but I think Pittman is still the alpha. And if they're doing a lot of RPOs, there's been a lot of studies that when they're doing these run play options, it's the first read that's going to. And who is that guy in the Colts offense? I'm pretty sure it's going to be Michael Pittman. So I think that with Pittman, everything is there for him except the touchdowns. And he knows this. He's actually come out and spoken about, hey, I think I'm being disrespected. I know I got paid this offseason, but I haven't really scored a lot of touchdowns. So even he recognizes that he's been letting fantasy managers down in the half PPR scoring because, hey, I'm doing my job in PPR, but half PPR, I got to pick up the slack, and that comes with touchdowns. So if I think this Colts offense is going to cook, which I do, I'm very confident that this offense is going to be at least inside the top 10 because of Shane Steichen and Richardson and what they can do. I'm very excited about Pittman taking another step forward. And again, going from a player that's been good to maybe that next level into great with a new quarterback under center.
What do you make of Pittman, Jacob? He's a player that I just have loved since he came into the NFL, and to Erickson's point, hasn't quite made that leap into kind of an elite fantasy wide receiver for you. But I think he's a good pick for this section because he is proven, but there's more upside to come, I hope.
I hope to. Pittman is definitely a really good player, and we've seen him continue to get better. I do worry about his touchdown upside. The Colts are just middle of the pack in terms of implied points from Vegas this year, and I actually have them projected for the 3rd fewest passing touchdowns. And the reason being is Shane Steichen. In 3 of his past 4 years calling plays, Steichen's offenses have actually produced more rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. The only one that wasn't was Justin Herbert's rookie season. And even in that season, Steichen's offense passed at a significantly lower rate than the league average when in the red zone. I think that's kind of how he likes to design his offense. And of course, with Anthony Richardson, I think that it's likely that we'll see that. But at the same time, I am fully in on Richardson as a talent and a passer and someone who can run an offense, more than just a scrambling quarterback that we're going to use to cheat in fantasy football. I think he really could unlock some things for this offense and push that passing touchdown much higher than my median projection is going to account for. And Pittman only stands to benefit from that. Touchdowns have been the only thing that have been lacking from his profile.
You know the beautiful thing about being a sports fan? There's only 2 days the whole year without a game. Just 2. With so much happening and so much action, that makes just about every day game day at DraftKings Sportsbook. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. It really couldn't be any easier or any simpler. Baseball, golf, UFC, there's something for every fan of every sport to bet on at DraftKings. And of course, with training camps finally underway, football season is basically here too. So if you're new to DraftKings, you got to check this out. New customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, let's move to our young breakout wide receivers that we see having some upside. Jacob, we'll start with you.
It's George Pickens, and I have not typically been a George Pickens guy because he's not a big target earner in college or his first few years in the pros. But I think that could change. I think that we're going to see this offense really, really concentrated on him. So we mentioned the importance of play action and pre-snap motion in reference to the Saints. The Steelers are another team that I expect to really benefit from more play action and more pre-snap motion this year. They ranked bottom 5 in play action rate in each of Pickens' first 2 years. But Arthur Smith loves play action. And we've also seen Arthur Smith's offenses focus on one receiver off of these play action looks. And I think that that's going to be Pickens. Since entering the NFL, he's 3rd in yards per target on play action targets. We know that he can win down the field. I think that's a great fit. And then the other thing that's really encouraging is that, I called him not a target earner, but last year he really was when Deontay Johnson wasn't on the field. And we got a decent sample of it because Johnson missed some games. During the time that Johnson was out, his first read target rate shot up 38% in the 4-game stretch without Deontay. 38% first read target rate. For reference, this is from Fantasy Points data. For reference, Devontae Adams led the NFL with a 41% rate. Keenan Allen was second at 40%. So that's like right in the same range as George Pickens when he was operating as this offense's number 1 receiver. And if you want a larger sample, if you look at his career data on a per route basis without Deontay Johnson on the field, his target rate rises from 18% with Johnson on to 24.3% with Johnson off. So again, that's like kind of offensive centerpiece type of target rate. And so I don't know what the actual passing volume is going to be like. It's kind of similar to the Michael Pittman discussion in Indianapolis, where the Steelers, I think, are last or second to last. I think the Patriots are below them in projected passing touchdowns for me. They're near the bottom of the league in projected passing yards as well. So ultimately getting him to finishing his wide receiver 1 type of upside, probably not, just because of the offensive environment. But I also think that there's a chance that he is going to be really efficient with these opportunities. He's been more efficient than Drake London to this point in his career. And I think if he slides into that role that London's been playing in Smith's offense, where the target rates are astronomical, if Pickens slides into that role and is a little bit more efficient at it because he's more suited to be the deep downfield ball winner that Smith wants, I think it could be pretty exciting.
Erickson, where do you have Pickens ranked this year?
I have him in that wide receiver 2 range. I think he has a lot of upside. I think that he's one of these year 3 no-brainer breakouts, and it's just the fear of Arthur Smith that's keeping his price so low. Mm-hmm. A lot of these upside players, especially going in best ball, you can see because they're so expensive, because everyone is chasing that upside. But rounds 4, a receiver entering year 3 that has shown the ability to command a high target share without Deontay Johnson, he's the clear alpha in this passing game. No one else in the Steelers offense is stepping up. Van Jefferson is the number 2 receiver on this team. Right. George Pickens, yes, I get the concerns of Arthur Smith's going to be run heavy, and maybe that leads to a couple of frustrating games where Pickens maybe doesn't get targeted. But what happens? Things level out, because then the next week he's going to go for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I like George Pickens a lot. I was going to actually put him on my list in my top picks from each round a couple weeks ago, but I ultimately went up with Malik Neighbors. But I felt like Pickens still had that upside profile that I definitely want to chase, and he's someone that I am happily drafting in a lot of these best ball rooms.
I probably shouldn't admit this. I completely forgot Van Jefferson was even on the Steelers.
Well, that we're talking about him as a number point, 2, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not really that. You kind of briefly mentioned people maybe being a little concerned about Arthur Smith.
You're one of them, Worm?
No, I was gonna say
it's okay.
I'm actually not that concerned about Arthur Smith's I'm not that worried about what he did with the Falcons, because now that he has a head coach in Mike Tomlin who is not going to suffer fools. He's not going to let him mess around and not get the ball to the best players. If George Pickens is clearly the best receiver on this team, which I think there's a really strong case that he will be, he will get the ball. Mike Tomlin is not going to let him, throw to the, Darnell Washington instead. Right. So I'm not at all worried about the Atlanta stink on Arthur Smith.
Good.
All right, Eric, so let's go to your next player.
Imagine a world where Christian Watson has healthy hamstrings. That's the upside that I'm chasing here with Christian Watson, because this Green Bay Packers wide receiver room is so polarizing. We're all trying to figure out, and I'm sure that Gibbs has loved doing the Green Bay Packers wide receiver projections. I'm sure that's a grand old time trying to figure out who's going to be the number 1 here. But for me, when it looks at just when Watson was on the field healthy last year, he was just gobbling up a lot of these high value targets. He had 15 end zone targets last year. That combined for 6th of all the players in between the regular season and in the postseason combined. Christian Watson was a part-time player for the majority of the season, along with all the games that he missed. So I don't want to forget about that rookie year where he was checking off every single elite box that you want from a rookie wide receiver and then just write it off completely because of injuries the next season. And at least he showed that he could still be efficient, at least from a fantasy point scoring, which is the reason we play this game. It does matter how many fantasy points you score, especially when the opportunities he was getting matched the production. Yes, has his production been very boosted by touchdowns? Yes. But he's also seeing the red zone targets. He's seeing the end zone targets that suggest to me, is Romeo Doubs going to catch as many touchdowns as he did last year if Christian Watson is healthy? Is Jayden Reed going to score 10 touchdowns again with Christian Watson healthy in the lineup? I don't think so. So I think that when we're chasing these players with massive touchdown upside, we like the quarterback and Jordan Love. He's going to be there for the long term. We've seen him been able to gel with Christian Watson. So I think for me, Christian Watson has so much upside, and it's just dependent on, okay, is he healthy? And he's a young player. I know they've taken extra steps this year to try to fix his hamstring. So it remains to be seen, but he's going late enough in drafts where I feel like the injury risk is baked in enough where I feel like I can take a shot on the upside, because I don't think you have to draft him necessarily as a starter in most formats. So look, if he's healthy, I think that he's going to be able to have a ton of spike week potential. And if he gets injured, well, he wasn't that expensive that's going to kill your team.
Erickson, you'll appreciate this. I just noticed that I'm in the middle of a slow startup right now for a Superflex Dynasty League. So it's Superflex and tight end premium. So I went QB tight end to start. 3 of my first 4 receivers were Chris Olave, Michael Pittman Jr., and Christian Watson. So you would be loving my team.
In your mind, man. You saw the show sheet. It just took over.
I do too many. I was messaging Debro earlier too. Like, I'm so Debro pilled. I have like Trey McBride. I have just all of his favorite players too. So it's I definitely am being impacted by doing all these shows with you guys. Erickson, you did also kind of throw out that you were considering Jayden Reed for this section as well. So is there, do you like have a preference for Christian Watson where he's going compared to Jayden Reed, or do you see them as like one of these guys you think is going to kind of hit and you're not sure which?
I think that's kind of how I settle on it. But it's interesting because the Packers offense, we all really like a lot. Clearly, the Packers like their offense because they just made Jordan Love the highest paid quarterback in NFL history. So they're excited about this. We should be excited about the Packers. But the reason that they're so much cheaper than, for example, the Texans offense, I mean, who threw more touchdowns last year, Jordan Love or CJ Stroud? Jordan Love threw more touchdowns last year. Now, will that be the same this year? Not necessarily. But it goes to the point of this Packers passing game has upside. And so while we're trying to piece together, who's going to lead the team in targets? Well, if Jordan Love throws another 40 touchdowns, then they're probably all going to pay off their ADPs and where they're going. Now, Watson in particular, I think that he's kind of more in the mystery box because he missed so much time last year. We haven't really seen him play healthy all the way with Jordan Love. But Jayden Reed, I was concerned about his usage last year and the fact that he's not running routes on all the downs. And that's the concern if you want to, be fading Jayden Reed, and I get that. But he also had a insane rookie breakout. We love rookies that break out in year one. We're obsessed with them. And then they usually take a major step in year two, because what happens? Their roles expand. So when you just look at last year, it's easy to point out, okay, Jayden Reed's a limited time player. When all these guys come back, he's not going to be nearly productive. I get that argument. But he also was amazing as a rookie, day 2 pick. He was someone that I really liked as a prospect. And I don't know, kind of think back, it reminds me a little bit of Amon-Ra St. Brown, where, he only did his rookie year. It was nasty because TJ Hawkinson was hurt. And then what happened? He was just good. Like, he just continued to be good. I think Jayden Reed is good. So I can't say, I'm going to fade Jayden Reed because he's going to be a part-time player. Well, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think his role will probably expand. He showed at Michigan State he can still play on the perimeter. He's not only a slot guy. He can play more in the slot. And, what if Christian Watson, again, going back to that contingency upside, what if Watson gets hurt again? And we just roll back Jayden Reed as the number 1 target on the Packers? That would shock nobody. So, again, considering his ADP, I think it is baking in the risk of, maybe his role isn't that full-time that we all really want, but he's wide receiver 34, I believe, in ADP. It's actually interesting. It's the same year 2 ADP as Amon-Ra St. Brown at 64th overall. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, I did want to shout out Jayden Reed a little bit too, because I think there's a lot of upside in this Packers offense, as we will also get into a little bit later on.
Jacob, you did say you sent an extra name for this section, and it was, you kind of picking between 3 names. One of them was Christian Watson. So is he the guy in this Packers offense that you're kind of buying into if you have to pick one?
He is, but I do love Jayden Reed as well. And I think the point that Erickson made about if Watson goes down, Reed becomes a superstar is totally valid. For what it's worth, when Watson, Dobbs, and Reed were all on the field last year, 159 route sample size, including the playoffs, Watson actually led that group in targets. That surprised me because Reed, this is including only plays when Reed was on the field. And Reed is a shorter target guy who has more stuff kind of designed to him. Watson is running down the field more, especially now that they have Reed in the offense. They got more design looks to Watson his rookie season, but last year he was mostly running deeper routes. And that's evidence in the fact that he had 547 air yards within this split. Watson did. The next closest was Reed at 278. So like there's massive opportunity for him. And he has been the guy who's drawn targets at the highest rate of all the players who win on the field. He produced with him as well within this split. He had 335 receiving yards. Reed was second at 200, Dobbs had 158. And then to Erickson's point about touchdowns, Christian Watson over the past 2 seasons, when on the field, has accounted for 50% of Green Bay's end zone targets. That was up to 58% with Jordan Love last year. So even higher with Love than with Rodgers. If this offense takes off, if Love is an MVP candidate, if there are, 40 plus touchdowns and Watson is healthy for most of it, it could get like truly nuts with the touchdowns. And so that's where the upside comes in for him to just absolutely crush and be like a league winner at this price.
Jacob, let's stick with you for your next young breakout wide receiver.
So it's Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who was a disappointment in his rookie season. And I think to understand why, there's a ton of contextual stuff with what we got in Seattle last year. First off, the offensive line was a problem. And I think Shane Waldron's plan for Jaxon Smith-Njigba in the slot was already a little bit problematic and boring. But then when the offensive line became such an issue, he really leaned into Jason just being this drag route runner. That was what he was doing from the slot over and over. And if you look at Jason's splits, he was way better when he was outside of the slot. He was way better when he was allowed to run downfield routes. These just over and over the middle, predictable vanilla routes did nothing for him. And if you look at like design target rates, he was at near the top of the league because it was like just drags and screens and stuff like that. Just ways to work around the offensive line. The offensive line should be healthy and should have pretty strong tackle play. They drafted a guard that I'm pretty excited about. I think the offensive line could be a lot better. The other thing is coaching. I don't want to pile on Waldron too much, but I think coaching, particularly, I want to focus on Ryan Grubb and what he brings to Seattle, because I think that he could really help this offense and is really perfectly paired for Geno Smith and the receivers that he has here. So I think we're going to see way more 3 receiver sets. That's important for sure. That's what we've seen from Grubb at the collegiate level. And I think we're going to see a ton of downfield passing, which is really important for Geno Smith. And I think Geno Smith has been much better than people realize. Shout out to Hayden Wings of Underdog Fantasy for this stat. Since 2021, Geno Smith is the QB1 overall in completion percentage over expectation. The next closest are Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, and Aaron Rodgers. So this is a real stat that's important and points towards Geno being very effective. And completion percentage over expectations takes into account where the targets are coming. And so like being able to be efficient on his downfield routes is why on his downfield throws is why Geno checks out so high in this regard. I think he's just like such a great fit for Grubb. The other thing is the Seahawks produced fewer offensive plays than anyone in the NFL last year. They were the only team that was under 1,000 total offensive plays. And this is where Mike Macdonald comes in for Seattle, the new head coach coming over from Baltimore. He's been their defensive coordinator. I think that he's going to help this team so much, just shoring things up. Last year, the Seahawks could not stop anybody on third down. They were like bottom 3 in all sorts of third down efficiency metrics on defense. And that's actually one of the most correlated stats, defensive third down stops, with total offensive play volume. Does that make sense? Like being able to get other teams off of the field, gets the ball back in your hand, and gets you more time on the clock. And I think that it's going to be so important to have Macdonald taking over, because this defense has a lot of talent on it. And I think if they're able to stop teams more often and get the ball back in the offense's hands, we're just going to see more plays overall. Even just a return to normalcy with the play volume will be huge for this offense because they were literally dead last.
One interesting note too about Macdonald is that when he first took over as Baltimore's defensive play caller, that first like 2 months or so of that first season, there actually were a lot of broken. It's a very cerebral defense. So there was a lot of like broken plays defensively, like in the defensive backfield where they gave up big plays. So it wasn't like these long extended drives that kept the Ravens offense off the field. It was, the other team's scoring quickly, and now it becomes a shootout, and the offense was having to throw more and more anyway. So even if the defense kind of struggles to adapt right away, it really wasn't until they brought Roquan Smith over that the defense kind of took another step forward with McDonald. But because it was kind of the way of the defense struggling was broken plays and kind of these big, quick scoring drives, it still led to, more time on the field for the Ravens offense and a need to throw more. So even that, if they struggle early, could kind of play well for receivers on this team. JSN, like, I could not have loved him more as a prospect coming into the NFL. Obviously, like, a disappointing year one, but I am like in no way out on him or giving up or anything after just one tough year.
Yeah, I want to talk about him as a player just a little bit, because I did go back and watch every route that Jaxon Smith-Njigba ran last year, because like you, I was like pretty convicted on him as a player. I think we saw what we needed to see. I really think that it's possible that we're just going to forget about this rookie season. He was much, and it's borne out in the data as well. He was much better against man coverage than he was against zone coverage, which is unusual if he's just a slot guy, but I think he's much more than just a slot guy. Much better against man coverage, very good against press coverage, data-wise, and then if you watch him, people can't get their hands on it. People cannot press this guy. He just like brushes them off. He just moves in a different way. And it's very, very exciting, especially when he moves into this role that we've seen Jalen Polk and McMillan both thrive in at Washington, where they're getting more and more involved down in these layer intermediate looks down the field. I think he fits so well with this offense. And everything I saw last year when watching him, plus the data, is like, he's really, really good. If you look at Matt Harmon's reception perception, man coverage scores, all that stuff, he's like, this guy is good. It's not, I think there are a lot of reasons to be bullish on him turning things around.
Erickson, what do you make of JSN this year?
I've been warming on JSN as I've kind of taken a deeper dive into the numbers, providing context to his role last year. The fact that he opened last year with the wrist injury, so that kind of set him back a little bit. The fact that he didn't play his final year at Ohio State because he was dealing with, I believe it was a hamstring injury. So I think there's enough where he showed, even he was really good after the catch. He was still showing that he could make plays after the catch when he was getting the ball. So I think JSN, especially given his price point where he goes outside the top 40 receivers, you're looking for players with upside. He's a former first-round pick entering his second season, and you can see the path where he's getting more opportunities in his offense. They're saying all the right things in training camp. I think that we're all kind of collectively believing that Tyler Lockett is kind of start to hit the decline in his production. So if Lockett's no longer the number 2, then you have Metcalf as the number 1, but he's really been a 1A. He's never been such an alpha that it's prevented another receiver from being productive. So if JSN is now stepping into that, Tyler Lockett production role, well, how often it's always been Metcalf and Lockett. The argument every year is, why do we keep drafting Metcalf over Lockett? They score the same amount of fantasy points every single year. So if JSN takes on that production, not necessarily the role because they're different players, but if he takes on that type of production, well, he's going to look like a steal. And I think worst case scenario, even if he doesn't have his massive upside breakout, I think it's pretty safe to say he's going to be much better than he was as a rookie. I think that he's too talented. So even if it's not face melting, again, players can improve. And it doesn't mean that he's going to be great in year 2, but he can definitely improve from where he was as a rookie. And I think that makes him a strong investment, given that there is a strong upside case as well.
Yeah, the upside is obvious, but even if he doesn't hit it, like, he will outperform wide receiver 42, which is what he is in ECR, barring, an injury or something. So I think he's a great investment too. Erickson, we've already touched a bit on the Texans wide receiving room, but you do want to hit on Tank Dell here as the last young breakout wide receiver.
Yeah, so chasing these offenses that could throw for 45, 50 touchdowns potentially, that's how you find upside, is with touchdowns. And Tank Dell, to me, can go as the cheapest Texas wide receiver. I think that he has a lot of upside, because if you ask CJ Stroud who his favorite wide receiver is, he's probably going to say Tank Dell, because that's what he did. He was the one that advocated for the Texans to draft Tank Dell in the first place. And when you look at the numbers, at least when Dell and Collins were healthy last year, they're pretty similar. Similar target share, similar AR share, similar points per game in terms of both guys were putting up top 10 fantasy football numbers. So it's interesting because we never got to see it play out for the full season. I remember doing a show with you, Worm, where it was a debate where, like, hey, who do you want the rest of the season? You want Tank Dell or Nico Collins? And it's like, well, who had the big week? Who's coming off the big week? That's the guy I want. So it was a very tough question to kind of parse through to figure out who you wanted more. And then by default, Dell goes down with the fibula injury, and it made Nico Collins, again, saw his production boost even more with Tank Dell out of the lineup. So the concern is, okay, with Dell, is he actually back from this leg injury? We saw Tony Pollard last year suffer a similar injury. He plays running back, different receiver, but he said it took him till the middle of the season to feel himself again. So that's the concern with Tank Dell. And I know that he's been at practice. He's been practicing in full. So it seems like he should be okay. But we'll see in real life scrimmages and in the NFL as the games kick off, how well Tank Dell's actually performing remains to be seen, especially when you have two other really talented guys in the offense between a Nico Collins and a Stephon Diggs. So that's kind of the downside case for him. But the upside case is, I mean, he broke out as a rookie receiver. These are the profiles that we want to chase, and he was super productive. Again, he was matching Nico Collins in terms of those per game metrics when he was healthy. And he did it as a rookie, not as a third-year pro. So I think that's really impressive. And I really think if it weren't for the injury, well, would we be ranking Nico Collins so much farther ahead of Tank Dell? What would the Texans receivers look like? So obviously that's not based in reality because Tank Dell did get hurt, and that's why he's going the last out of these Texans receivers. But I think that he has similar upside to a Stephon Diggs or to a Nico Collins, just based on the relationship he has with CJ Stroud and the fact that last 4 games they played together, Tank Dell had more receiving yards than Nico Collins did. So there's a case where if Dell's firing at all cylinders, maybe in the second half of the season, maybe that's when Dell takes over as the most productive Texas receiver.
I am getting a lot of Dell this year just because he's going cheapest and I want to be invested in the offense. So I'll just, when the other two are gone, I'll take him. Even if I like Nico Collins better. Obviously, Jacob, you're planting your flag on Collins. Are you interested in Dell as well?
Yeah, for sure. When both players are on the field, 48 targets to Nico, 43 to Tank Dell. But Tank Dell actually outscored him because he had 6 touchdowns and Nico only had 3. And to me, that just kind of illustrates the point that defenses are going to not be able to focus on Tank Dell. Especially when you add Stephon Diggs to the equation, I think we could see where he's the one getting the most advantageous looks pretty often, and Stroud trusts him. And so he might actually end up being like the most efficient with his opportunities. I think he's a great pick at ADP. I do prefer him straight up to Stephon Diggs.
All right, let's go to the deep sleeper wide receivers here with upside. And again, we're not necessarily saying that these are guys that are going to
stop, Worm. Enough of these guys are going to the moon. They're going to melt faces. Don't put a caveat on it. Come on.
When you have the title of the episode is massive upside, and we're going to throw out a Panthers wide receiver, I don't want people yelling at me.
You mean a first round pick receiver? That's what you're talking about.
Well, we'll get to that one later. Jacob, your first player here is actually, Josh Downs. So we've talked about Michael Pittman already in this Colts offense, but you see some upside with another guy here too.
Yeah, so we're getting really specific here, but when both Downs and Pittman were on the field together through the first 8 weeks, and I bring that split up because Josh Downs injured his knee in week 9 and was notably less efficient from that point on, but he just kept playing through it. When both players were on the field together through the first 8 weeks, Pittman had only 5 more targets than Downs. Downs had more receiving yards than Pittman and more PPR points than Pittman. That's a bit misleading, because Downs comes off the field when they go to 2 receiver sets. But when they're both on the field, he actually outproduced Pittman, which is just very interesting for a rookie and an offense where Pittman was operating as the clear alpha. The other thing is, and this is another really obscure one, but Downs was really, really good. This is a per fantasy points data at creating off script. So per fantasy points data, Josh Downs, 331 of his 771 receiving yards came on plays where he was not the first read or a designed target, which was the highest rate in the NFL. I think that it makes sense that he could be the guy that Richardson ends up depending on when he gets off script. And Richardson is very good at navigating the pocket and waiting until he has the right opportunity. He's looking to create plays down the field with his arm more than a lot of other scrambling quarterbacks who are just looking to run once the play breaks down. And to me, Downs is the guy. A.D. Mitchell potentially could throw his name into this conversation, but Downs is the guy. He's very, very good at just shaking one person and getting away from them. And that's borne out in his man coverage data. If you look at Matt Harmon's work on reception perception, the only receivers, and he hasn't done every single receiver yet, but he has done most of them. The only receivers who had a higher man coverage grade than Downs last year were A.J. Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins. And then you have Downs ahead of Justin Jefferson, ahead of Chris Olave. That's wild to me. And I think that when these plays break down, he can beat one guy. And then the other thing is he's very, very good at the contested catch, which I don't think people realize because he's short, but that was something he excelled at North Carolina. And so I think he's a guy who might get leaned on a lot. And when it comes to, could this offense exceed expectations in the passing game, like with these explosive plays from Richardson, I think Downs might be the guy who's doing that a lot more than people realize.
Erickson, you obviously are a believer in Pittman this year. Are you also a believer in Downs, who, again, is going so much later that it's going to be hard for him not to at least give value?
I think that with Downs, it just comes down to what is the passing volume. Again, we are concerned about Pittman's potential touchdowns. I don't think Downs is going to leapfrog him in the red zone department of things. So that's kind of where maybe he's a better real life player than necessarily a fantasy contributor. And that's why, that's the concern with Josh Downs. And Mitchell, for example, I think Mitchell could have a lot of spike weeks just because I think he could be the main vertical threat. So does he end up hitting your lineup more in a best ball scoring format than a Josh Downs, where Josh Downs is really consistent, but okay, he was 4 for 40 this week because they only threw the ball 25 times. So he's putting up good peripheral numbers. He's catching the ball. He's getting open, and that's helping the offense move. But it's Richardson scoring the touchdowns. It's Jonathan Taylor. It's Michael Pittman. And does Josh Downs as the fourth option? Yeah, he looks really good, but again, it's not working out in his favor situationally. So I still think, though, putting him in this list makes sense because you're betting on a player that we know is good, right? And usually what happens is players that are good, they rise to the occasion, especially in a potential injury situation, or if somebody goes down, well, Josh Downs would step up. And last year you saw the Colts really, if Josh Downs had been healthy, we probably would have seen more production from him when Michael Pittman did get hurt. The Colts were dying for production at receiver when Pittman missed a couple games. He was dealing with his concussion, but Downs was disappointing because of the knee injury, right? And that's why he was forcing his way into the line because he needed to play, but he wasn't 100%. So that's kind of my spin on Downs.
Erickson, you've already talked about multiple Packers receivers, and you're going to throw another one at us.
Because the Packers are good offense to invest in, and they're cheap across the board. None of them are overly expensive because we're not sure who's going to step up. But what do we know? We feel pretty good the quarterback is going to be good, that they're going to score a lot of touchdowns. So I'm willing to throw darts on all of these guys, and that starts with Dontayvion Wicks. ECR, wide receiver, 64. Look, averaged nearly 2 yards per route run last year. That ranked 27th among all wide receivers, top 5 among all rookies per True Media. Wicks' first down per route run tied Devontae Adams for 18th among all players. So Jordan Love spread the love last year. There really was no one that he stepped up to that consistently had a consistent top tier target share because Watson was in and out of the lineup. He was dealing with injuries. Reed had the most targets, but when you look at how many players had 40 plus targets, I think it was like 7 different players had 40 or more targets on this Packers offense, the most of any other team in the NFL last year. So a couple injuries here or there. Maybe he leapfrogs Romeo Doubs on the lineup. And then you have Wicks in a full-time role. Christian Watson doesn't stay healthy. I think Dontayvion Wicks showed a lot as a rookie receiver that, hey, this guy has some talent. This guy can win downfield. We like this player. And all they've talked about is the coaches saying he's Devontae Adams. Jordan Love saying that the ceiling, the sky's the limit for this guy. And I think we should take notice of that, especially in home leagues where he's not going nearly as high as he is in these best ball formats. The best ball formats are for the D-gens, right? But these are the people that are dialed in and drafting since May. So I think it's important to look at where their ADPs are and apply it to your home league and think, man, Wicks is going really late in my home draft. I'm just going to stash this guy on my bench and see what happens and kind of see how this Packers room plays out. So for me, that's why I like Wicks a lot as a late round sleeper.
Yeah, it's sometimes tricky. It's often tricky to kind of parse through the quotes that you hear when everybody's being optimistic anyway. But like Jordan, to your point, like coaching staff has spoken really highly of him. Jordan Love, I think the quote he used was like, he's going to have a monster year this year. Like they are seemingly very like big believers in Wicks. Jacob, where do you see Wicks like kind of in the pecking order in this receiver room? And at wide receiver 64, is there real upside there?
I think it's unlikely that he's going to ever not ever, but this year take the X receiver role from Dobbs. I think it's really important that Dobbs kind of fills that sacrificial X receiver who's taking defense's attention down the field, but not drawing a ton of targets. I think he's their clear best bet at that. And Green Bay does really love him, just like they love Wicks. So it's probably got to come through an injury for Wicks to be relevant. But I'll echo everything Erickson said about him as a player. He's great. Everybody seems to think he's great. Real life people, real life football people, fantasy people, everybody gets it. And yeah, make bets on good players and good offenses. That's probably the way to go, especially at this point in the draft. I love it.
Jacob, let's go with your final wide receiver here. He's the lowest ranked receiver in ECR of anybody we're talking about today. And as I alluded to, he's on the Panthers.
Yeah, so I'll just start there. I'm actually kind of bullish on the Panthers. I'm doing these team-by-team previews and definitely did not expect to feel this way when I projected the Panthers before really, really digging in to some of the player-specific stuff and the scheme-specific stuff. I did not feel very good about them, and that's mostly because the Vegas implied totals for this team are awful. So the most likely outcome is probably that the offensive pieces in this offense don't matter very much for fantasy, other than maybe Deontay Johnson, maybe Jonathan Brooks. And that's why Xavier Legette is drafted where he is. But the more I dug in, man, it was an impossible set of circumstances for Bryce Young last year. No one was getting open, like absolutely no one. Adam Thielen was 39th in ESPN's open score. The next highest Carolina Panther was 112th, and it was Hayden Hurst. Out of 153 players, the Panthers' two outside receivers ranked 152nd and 143rd. And so we're replacing that with Deontay Johnson, who's literally first in ESPN's open score of the past 3 years, ahead of Justin Jefferson, ahead of Tyreek Hill, ahead of CeeDee Lamb, and Xavier Legette, who is a fifth-year breakout. So, grain of salt, but the numbers that he put up last year were insane. Over 3.4 yards per outrun. That puts him in exclusive company in terms of single season production among, then you throw in first round NFL draft capital as well. That's a player who I think we can reasonably expect to potentially be an NFL producer. The last thing I'll throw in here is that among 24 quarterbacks, Bryce Young ranked fourth in fantasy point data's accurate throw rate when targeting an open receiver. And this doesn't include screens. He didn't have open receivers very often, like we just talked about. Fourth among 24. That is interesting to me. And when I watched Bryce Young, he's making plays. He is making throws. If you just like search my Twitter name and Bryce Young, you'll find a lot of this stuff because I did include a lot of the plays. He really there was some stuff on film that was positive. It's just hard to find stats that are positive. And I guess I said that was the last thing, but two more things actually. I'm so sorry. I'll go all day. More motion and play action. We've talked about this already. Those are huge. I think we're going to get that from Dave Canales. Carolina was at the bottom of the league in those last year. You're probably noticing a theme by this point. The offenses that weren't good were in the bottom of the league of those things. Also, improved offensive line play is going to be huge. They really, really addressed the offensive line. They really needed to. I feel really good about the additions that they made. So everything to me is pointing up. Take it for what it's worth because Vegas doesn't believe in them, but I kind of do.
Erickson, what do you think of the Panthers and specifically what the offense could be for fantasy? Because I do really like Dave Canales. I think that is a move that it makes me more excited for the Panthers than maybe I would have been, and more excited for Bryce Young than maybe I would have been if they had gone in a different direction at head coach. But what do you think about this as a option for fantasy, really as an offense as a whole?
There's nowhere else to go but up from last year. They can't possibly be worse than they were last year. And I think that bringing in an actual head coach with Dave Canales coming in, we've seen him reorchestrate resurgences from Geno Smith, from Baker Mayfield. So Bryce Young is a elite distributor. That's what he was at Alabama, a playmaker in terms of getting the ball to his best pieces. That's going to include Deontay Johnson, and that's going to include Xavier Legette as long as he's healthy and ready to go, because he offers a lot yards out to the cash that they did not have last year. We're expecting Jonathan Mingo to take a step forward. No, because and the thing with the Panthers too that they can't keep missing on these guys, right? Eventually one of these guys has to hit. Like Terrace Marshall, miss. Jonathan Mingo, miss. Xavier Legette, it looks like a carbon copy in so many ways to those other players, but eventually you just got to hit on one of these guys. So I think Legette, just looking at the draft capital alone, right? He's a first round pick that's going outside the 70 receivers. I think that by itself is enough justification to just see how it plays out, especially in the second half of the year where maybe he has a bigger role now he's more accustomed to the offense. We know that he's not this finesse route runner, but the Panthers need to find ways to get the ball into playmakers' hands. And what if Jonathan Brooks isn't ready to go? Who's going to be moving? Who's going to be generating explosive plays? Deontay Johnson is going to drown in targets. We know that, but he's not the one that's going to be running downfield, getting chunk gains for this offense. They're going to have to develop explosive somewhere, and Legette really checks off a lot of those boxes.
All right, Erickson, final wide receiver we're talking about today. Who you got?
It's an Atlanta Falcons receiver, Darnell Mooney. And if you guys read the newsletter from Jacob Gibbs today, this was not even planned. Falcons projections, pass game about to explode. So I already know Gibbs is going to love me talking about Darnell Mooney here. So let's go down narrative street first, right? So Darnell Mooney, him and Kirk Cousins are locker room neighbors. Love that. So Mooney said to Cousins, again, he's always giving him insight. Kirk's the guy. He's the reason why everything is flowing. Now let's get mathematical, right? It's a stats show. We got Gibbs on. We got to talk stats. All right. So this is from Warren Sharp. Nearly 40% of deep targets to Darnell Mooney have been inaccurate in his career over the span, which is the number one. That's worst. But when you look at the number one quarterback in terms of accuracy, 20 yards plus downfield, is Mooney's new quarterback, Kirk Cousins, with the Atlanta Falcons. So Darnell Mooney has been miscast, has been in horrible situations with the Bears for the past 3 seasons. He's been dealing with injuries, playing with, I believe it was an ankle injury that he dealt with entering last year. And I think that really limited his production heading into this season. And you saw last year, get him as the DJ Moore show, Cole Kmet and Darnell Mooney was really not productive. But I always felt like he was really underrated. And when he signed with the Falcons, I thought it was a really sharp signing. And when I kind of dove deeper into it, so the Falcons director of player personnel, Ryan Pace, so he drafted Mooney in the 5th round through the 2020 draft. So there's a connection here with this Falcons team that they went out and sought for Mooney specifically because they know what he's capable of doing. Who has more 1,000-yard receiving seasons on their resume? Darnell Mooney or Drake London? Darnell Mooney has 1, Drake London has 0. So Mooney, I think, has that same type of upside that a Drake London has that's made his ADP essentially into round 2 based on all projection, not based on Drake London's body of work, besides having a high target share while competing with nobody for targets except for an injured Kyle Pitts. So when I look at Darnell Mooney, I think that he's so underrated in this offense as that potential deep threat for Kirk Cousins. And I think that his body of work is being slept on. And I know the last thing I want to make here, the last point here, is every year we get these free agent wide receiver contracts that we have to do like a double take and think, wait, Jacoby Myers got that amount of money? Christian Kirk got that amount of money? These underrated beta receivers end up getting a lot of money from these teams in free agency, and usually it doesn't work out. But every year it seems like one of these signings ends up working out. And I think for me, I think that's going to be Darnell Mooney. I think that he's just a very underrated receiver. He's an elite separator, and that's not really Drake London's game. London is not an elite separator, while Mooney, I think, is. Going back to his rookie year when he destroyed Jalen Ramsey and then just get the ball thrown over his head. So, and you know who was on that sideline? Zach Robinson, the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, formerly of the Rams. So I think Darnell Mooney, wide receiver 68, he's a bet on this Falcons offense, like Jacob Gibbs said, is going to explode in 2024. So I think he's a really cheap way to get access to a Falcons passing game that a lot of people are excited about. And he doesn't cost nearly as much as a Drake London round 2 ADP. When you look at their resumes, I mean, has Drake London been that much better than Darnell Mooney? I don't think so. So for me, I like Mooney a lot.
Erickson's cooking, but I will not stand for the Jacoby Myers slander. We're not going to call
well,
Jacoby
he was
Myers.
Underrated. That's what I'm saying. He was underrated.
He should have got more money.
Jacob, this is the perfect opportunity to plug the newsletter as we wrap up on the last player. But yeah, what do you think about Mooney?
I'm excited for Mooney. I just was kind of in a rush preparing for this and everything today, so I didn't get to highlight him in the newsletter, but this is great. I'm going to clip what Erickson just said and like slap that on my Twitter because, yeah, that was great. I also think the one note that I would add on Mooney is that we could see him used in the pre-snap motion stuff, the way that the Rams use like Tutu Atwell early in the season. I think we could see Zach Robinson potentially play around with some of that stuff. And it might be Rondell Moore. I'm not sure what role Mooney's going to play exactly. Is he like, who's going to be the X receiver? I'm curious about that. Like Mooney doesn't seem to prototype as that kind of a player. I guess it'll be London, but I think he's been better when he's moved out of that role. And in the past, they've had other receivers that they just throw Mac Hollins there and have him do it, you know? But now they have kind of smaller bodied receivers. But overall, it's again, another good offense that we're placing a bet on and a cheap bet. And I feel good about that. And I think we have seen some instances where Mooney looks like a pretty good player.
All right, we will get out of there on that. We got through actually more than a dozen receivers here since we hit on a couple extras. So I thought that was super, informational, a lot of good actionable nuggets there.
It was
very
great,
stats heavy show.
That's the word you're looking for. It was great.
Well, I was trying to get at that. It was a lot of good numbers, and so you threw out some of the narrative stuff on some of them, but when you have Jacob on the show,
Jacob's driving the stats bus. I'm driving down narrative street. That's my role.
All right, so you get a little bit of both on this episode. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you so much for making the time, Jacob. Thank you to you, Erickson, as always, and thank you to everybody for listening. For the guys, I'm Ryan Wormeli. We'll see you again next time.